Welcome to this Getting Started with SharePoint Framework Extension tutorial series, and this is tutorial 1, build your first SharePoint Framework extension, aka Hello World Part 1. And this is the general availability September 2017 edition. You can find the tutorials also in written format, where you can follow up on what's actually happening within the video. So let's actually jump in directly on the topic. So I'm going to move into my console, and we're going to choose a folder where we're going to actually start creating our solution. So I'm going to use a PNP folder for that. And then I'm going to actually create a folder here where I'm going to create my first tutorial. So let's actually write here MD app extension. So we're going to create an application customizer. So we're going to name that accordingly, and let's actually jump on that folder. In here, I have already installed the latest version of SharePoint Framework Extension. You probably want to always use the latest version just to make sure that you have the latest and greatest capabilities available. So I'm going to actually start the Yeoman template for SharePoint extensions and SharePoint Framework solutions in general. So in here, we're going to first start asking a few questions. So what is the solution name? We kind of accept the default setting for that one. The next question is kind of interesting. So is this solution targeted to be only on SharePoint Online, or also on SharePoint on-premises? So SharePoint 2016 Feature Pack 2 does support web parts or client-side web parts. Now, in this case, because we want to create an extension, we're going to choose SharePoint Online only, because extensions are only available in SharePoint Online, at least for the time being. So let's actually choose that. And then because we are already in the app extension folder, we're going to use the folder. The next question is also pretty interesting. So do we actually want this solution to be automatically available across all of the sites whenever it's getting deployed on the app catalog? In this case, we're going to answer no. This is a super interesting setting, though. It gives you an opportunity to push out automatically extensions and web parts to the sites with a certain details and technical things which we still need to consider, which are not covered within this tutorial. But for this one, we're going to answer no. So we need to explicitly install the solution to the site for the solution to be available and active. And we wanted to create an application customizer, so we're going to use an extension, and in this we're going to choose the application customizer. And then it's just a matter of selecting what's the application customizer name. So we're going to use the Hello World as the default value, and then the description. And this one will start then the scaffolding process. So this one will now create our solution. It will download all of the dependencies from NPM package gallery. And this will take a while, again, depending on your network connectivity and depending on your machine speeds and all of that. So IO IO has a factor in here. So we're going to speed up the video and continue when the scaffolding has been completed. And there we go. Now we have our scaffolding completed, which means that we can open up our chosen development environment. I'm going to use Visual Studio Code. You can use whatever environment you want to actually use. Visual Studio Code is it's a great tool, which I'm grown into or used to do for my development. Or used to use for my development. So let me zoom that slightly so you can actually see more easily what's available. So the basic structure for extensions is obviously exactly the same as for client-side web parts, if you're familiar with the client-side web part development, because the basic SharePoint Framework solution structure is exactly the same. The component type only defines what are the elements which are getting provisions underneath the source folder. So we can have absolutely multiple extensions in a single solution. We can have multiple web parts added on the same solution where our extensions are. But if we quickly have a look on the structure of the things, you can see that the basic settings and basic configuration is exactly the same as client-side web parts, if you are familiar with that one. Now, the actual source code for our application extension is created automatically based on the naming what you provided. So we wrote the Hello World, or we chose the Hello World default value. So the folder will be Hello World here. And then we can open up the actual manifest. So we can quickly have a look on the manifest values, manifest things here. So this one is basically telling SharePoint that we have a client-side we have an extension or SharePoint Framework Extension, which is a type of application customizer. So SharePoint knows certain technical details around this one. The most important thing here is actually the ID. We're going to use this ID when we will do debugging against the live SharePoint site from the Visual Studio Code. So we'll come back on that one slightly later. Now, if we want to have a look on the actual code, the basic structure of the code is relatively simple. So we're using the base application customizer. In the GA version of the extensions, we are by default using also dialog for all of our messaging within the extensions, which is a small change if you are familiar with the release candidate or dev preview versions of the extensions. Now, in here, we can also see the properties. So this is properties which can be used to initialize or parameterize different instances differently. So in this case, we're going to have a property called test message. But in a real world, that message or that property could change the behavior of the extension depending on the instance where it is. So in a one site, the properties might be set slightly differently than in another site, which will then change the behavior of your code. And that's really the key point of the property settings. And this can be configured based on, depending slightly on an extension, but you can configure the client-side component properties for the instance when we are getting this one deployed on the SharePoint, actual SharePoint sites. Like I said, in this case, the default test message is there. And for the default test message, we're actually going to take that one as a property. And that message will be added to a dialog, which will be shown whenever the application customizer will be rendered on a site. So relatively simple basic setup, but it's there to get you started and understanding how things are actually working. Now, we're not going to change the code yet. So let's first move into our console and see how the debugging actually works against the live SharePoint site. So I'm going to flip back on my console, and in my console, I'm going to do gulp serve -- no browser. And the reason why I'm doing gulp serve no browser is that the extensions cannot be currently debugged or tested using the local workbench. So there's no point for me to start a local workbench. So I'm actually adding that the no browser switch on the gulp serve. And that's going to now then start my local host. The local host is running on the default port of 4321, which is the node server, now serving my JavaScript from my local host. And now the interesting thing is, obviously, we want to test this and we want to see how the behavior actually works. So we can do that against the live SharePoint site. And there's some benefits, there's some downsides of that one. So obviously, the benefits is that we can test with the live data, which is super cool. The downside is that you don't have that benefit of local workbench, which gives you the offline development experience as well. But let's jump on a site and let's see how that actually works. So this is a typical out-of-the-box theme site, which is by default still using the let's say the classic experience from a page and welcome page perspective. We're going to test our extension, however, in the modern experiences in a normal document library. And by the way, you can absolutely change the welcome page of a site to be modern as well. So that's easily doable, but not really the topic of this tutorial. Now in here, how do I then actually start or do this testing? Is that we need to play around with the query parameters. So we need to tell the SharePoint that it's okay to reference our JavaScript file from the on-premises, from the local host, which is now running within my own computer. So to do so, we need to play around with the query parameters in the address bar. And let me actually start a notepad first, so I can actually show you the query parameter and here, and then we're able to modify that query parameter based on our instance. So this is directly taken from the written version of the tutorial, and we can see that we're referencing a local manifest from the local host 4321 temp manifest JSON. We will have a custom action there with that kind of ID. And that's the one thing what you need to update when you're doing this tutorial. So let's actually flip to our code. So we'll go back on our code. We'll go back onto the manifest file where we had the ID. And this is where the ID is actually super meaningful. So I'm going to copy that ID, move back on the notepad. I'm going to replace that GUID, which is essentially telling SharePoint that let's load that extension with that manifest ID. And it also defines that the location will be client-side extension application customizer. And it also says that the properties for debugging is test message, and the value for that one is hello as property. So let's copy that one. Let's get back on the browser. And here's my document library. You can do the testing against the modern list or against the modern document library. It really doesn't matter. The easiest way to do this is by going to the address bar. And in this case, by default, we have this view path here. So you actually want to get rid of that one and reload the page. So you get a clean, reload the page like that. So you get a clean URL, so you can paste in the query parameters there. So now I'm in the all items, so I got rid of all of the query parameters behind of that. Now I can just paste in my query parameter there and press enter. And that will then start the debugging process. And first question what we will ask from a UI perspective is that do you want to allow the scripts? And in this case, that's exactly what we want to do, because we want to do debugging against the live site. And we want to load our JavaScript file from our local host. So let's click load debug scripts. And then we can see actually our default experience with the default scaffolding, where we show you the dialog. And by using the dialog API to actually show you the message. And if I zoom in here, you can actually see that the value is hello from hello world application customizer and hello as a property. So now just to pinpoint that one. So now if I go back on the URL and if I update that property value, let's say hello there, and reload, we can actually modify the behavior of the application customizer. In this case, the behavioral differences is only impacting obviously the string what we're outputting, but it actually could have a much more significant behavioral difference based on the configuration and based on your custom implementation within the extension. Good. Now we've done testing of our application customizer. We know how to do testing with the debug query parameters. We created the application customizer, and in the next steps, we'll start actually enhancing and adding the additional things on the application customizer. But before but that's already in the second part of the Hello World tutorial series. So let's close up this video. And if you're interested in looking into how to use page placeholders to modify the page experience, that's explained in the following tutorial. Thanks for watching.